I still remember the way the winter sunlight touched the glass of our mansion that morning. Soft, golden, and cold all at once. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, landing gently on the hood of a sleek black car parked outside. That car, my husband's car, would soon become the center of a moment I'll never forget. I was standing near the living room window, coffee in hand, watching as Gabriel waited by the car. He stood there quietly, dressed in a simple gray coat, his breath forming little clouds in the cold air. He looked so humble, maybe too humble for this world of polished marble floors and diamond smiles. Inside, laughter echoed, the kind of laughter that sounded like it had never known struggle. It came from my old university friend Amelia, who had come to visit after years apart. She had always been charming, confident, and painfully aware of money. Back in college, she used to joke that love without luxury was just another word for suffering. When she arrived, she hugged me like we were sisters. Her perfume was expensive, her nails perfectly done, and her eyes scanned everything, the furniture, the art, the space, as if taking silent notes of wealth. And then her gaze fell on Gabriel outside. "Is that your new driver?" she asked casually, sipping her latte, her tone light but sharp. I froze for a moment. I didn't know how to respond. Something in her voice, that effortless arrogance, made the air heavier. Gabriel opened the car door just then, bowing slightly as he waited for my father to step out. Amelia smiled with amusement. "Wow," she whispered, "your father's really upgraded since we last met. Even the staff look like models." Her words stung, not because of what she said, but because I stayed silent. I should have corrected her. I should have told her that the man she called a driver was my husband. But instead, I just looked away, pretending I didn't hear. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear, or maybe I just wanted to see how far her assumptions would go. My father Jackson stepped out of the car moments later, calm, elegant, wearing that gentle smile that always carried hidden meaning. He greeted Amelia warmly, but I saw his eyes glance briefly at me, as if he already knew what was happening. He always knew. And then he said something that made Amelia's laughter fade instantly, something that turned the air in that room completely still. He looked at Gabriel and said softly, "Son, would you mind helping your wife bring in the bags?" The word son hung in the air like a secret finally released. Amelia's eyes widened. Her cup paused halfway to her lips. I could almost hear her heart drop into silence. That was the moment everything began to change. The moment when pride met truth, and truth didn't flinch. It's strange how the most life-changing moments often begin in silence. No grand music, no sudden lightning, just a quiet choice that shapes everything after. When I first met Gabriel, it wasn't in a ballroom or at one of my father's elegant charity dinners. It was in the parking lot of a small community cafe, the kind of place I'd never visited before that day. I had gone there secretly, trying to escape the world of polished perfection I lived in. The world where even kindness was calculated, and every smile came with a hidden price tag. It was raining that evening, cold, steady rain that blurred the city lights of Toronto into soft colors. I remember struggling with my umbrella, frustrated as it flipped inside out. And then a voice behind me said, "Here, let me help." When I turned, I saw a man holding an old umbrella, faded at the edges, but steady. He smiled gently, that kind of smile that doesn't demand attention but somehow holds it. That was Gabriel. He wasn't dressed like anyone I knew. No expensive coat, no polished shoes, just a simple sweater and jeans. He looked ordinary, and yet there was something extraordinary in the calmness of his eyes. He walked me to my car, making small talk about the weather, the traffic, the city's quiet charm. When I thanked him, he just shrugged and said, "Kindness doesn't cost much, only pride sometimes." Those words lingered long after he left. I didn't know then that our lives would intertwine so deeply, that the man who handed me an umbrella in the rain would one day hold my heart in his gentle hands. We met again a few weeks later. I had returned to the same cafe, maybe out of curiosity, maybe hope. He was behind the counter this time, wearing an apron, serving coffee with the same peaceful smile. When he saw me, he chuckled softly. "The umbrella girl," he said. And just like that, the conversation began again. Easy, effortless, real. I didn't tell him who I was. Not that I was Victoria Jackson, daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Canada. Not that I lived in a mansion on the edge of the lake with art worth more than his cafe. For once, I just wanted to be a person, not a name. Gabriel spoke little of himself, but I noticed things. his calloused hands, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he listened more than he spoke. He was saving for something, I could tell. He didn't talk about dreams like owning yachts or traveling the world. He talked about building something honest, a small place that feels like home, he once said. The more I saw him, the more I felt the world I came from start to lose its shine. I found myself craving his simplicity, his warmth. He didn't flatter me. He didn't care about my last name. He just cared about me. When my father found out, I expected fury. Instead, he was silent, deeply, thoughtfully silent. He invited Gabriel to dinner, quietly, without my knowledge. I was terrified when I walked into the dining room that night and saw them sitting together, my father, elegant as always, and Gabriel, nervous but composed. I'll never forget that conversation. My father asked him simple questions. What do you believe love really is? Would you still love my daughter if she had nothing? Gabriel didn't hesitate. He said, if love depends on what someone has, it isn't love. It's convenience. My father smiled, that small, knowing smile that made people uncomfortable because it saw right through them. He said nothing else that night, but I saw a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. After that evening, my father didn't stop our relationship. He didn't encourage it either. He just watched. A year later, Gabriel proposed to me, not with diamonds, but with a tiny silver ring he had saved for months to buy. He knelt on the wooden floor of that same cafe and whispered, I can't promise you the world, Victoria, but I can promise you honesty, peace, and a home that never lies. Those words were worth more than any vow I'd ever heard. We married quietly, no cameras, no press, no lavish ceremony. Just us, my father, and a few close friends. But peace doesn't last long in a world built on appearances. When people found out who I had married, whispers began, sharp, cruel, relentless. Some of my friends called it a phase. Others called it a mistake. And though I smiled through it, a small part of me began to wonder if they were right. Looking back now, I realized that's where the first crack appeared. Not in our marriage, but in my heart. I let their words plant seeds of doubt, small ones that slowly grew. I began noticing things I never cared about before. The way Gabriel's coat was old, how he took the bus sometimes instead of using the family car, how he never joined conversations about money or business. And every time someone called him lucky to have me, I felt a strange mix of pride and shame. My father noticed it too. One evening, he found me sitting quietly in the garden, lost in thought. He sat beside me and said, Victoria, don't let the world teach you to look down on goodness. It's rarer than wealth. I nodded, but my heart was too clouded to understand then. I thought I did, but I didn't, because soon that world of pride and whispers would test not only my marriage, but my very sense of love. Marriage changes you in ways you never expect, not because love fades, but because the world won't let it stay simple. After Gabriel and I married, we moved into a smaller house on the edge of the city. It wasn't what I was used to. The rooms were small, the walls thin, and the mornings quiet. No maids, no polished silver, no soft hum of luxury around me. Just the smell of coffee Gabriel made every morning, and the sound of birds through half-open curtains. At first I told myself it was peaceful, a new kind of life, a lesson in simplicity. And it was until people started to notice. When my old friends visited, they looked uncomfortable, sitting on our worn-out couch. Amelia once laughed softly, pretending it was a joke. Vic, this feels like camping, cute for a weekend, but not for life. I smiled then, but something inside me flinched. Her words sank deep, and I didn't even realize how much they began to shape my thoughts. Gabriel was patient, always patient. He worked long hours, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes helping with deliveries for extra income. He never complained, never once mentioned the gap between our worlds. But I started noticing the little things. How tired his eyes looked when he came home. How his hands were rough from lifting crates instead of holding champagne glasses. How he never joined me at my father's business events because he didn't fit in. At least, that's what I told myself. I began visiting my father more often, staying longer in that familiar comfort, the wide hallways, the soft piano music, the smell of jasmine tea that always filled the air. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, he looked at me for a long time before asking quietly, "Are you happy, Victoria?" I forced a smile. Of course, Dad Gabriel's wonderful. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he stirred his tea slowly and said, "Then why does your smile sound like you're convincing yourself?" I laughed it off, but my chest tightened. That night, I lay awake beside Gabriel, listening to his steady breathing. And for the first time, I wondered, had I made the right choice? The cracks deepened in quiet ways. A missed dinner here, a short argument there. Nothing dramatic, just small misunderstandings that grew roots in silence. One evening, I came home late from a friend's event, an event Gabriel wasn't invited to. He was sitting by the window, reading. A lamp cast a soft glow over his face. "Did you have fun?" he asked gently. I nodded, avoiding his eyes. "It was fine." He hesitated, then said, "I would have liked to come, you know." I sighed. "Gabriel, you wouldn't have enjoyed it. It's not your world." He looked at me for a long moment, that quiet, searching look that felt heavier than any words. Then he said softly, "Maybe not. But it's yours, and you're my world." His voice was full of love, and I didn't know what to do with it. Because deep down, I was starting to crave what I'd left behind. The comfort, the status, the admiration. I didn't want to admit it, but I missed being the daughter of Jackson more than being the wife of Gabriel. A few weeks later, my father invited us both to his mansion for dinner. I was relieved. Maybe it was his way of helping us reconnect. But the dinner was different this time. The house was full of people, business partners, family friends, and, of course, Amelia. She had always been close to my father's circle. She smiled too brightly when she saw us, her eyes flicking from my simple dress to Gabriel's old suit. "Oh, Victoria," she said, "you've really gone minimalist, haven't you?" The guests chuckled politely. Gabriel just smiled, unfazed, as he shook her hand. He had this calm grace that made others uneasy, a dignity that didn't depend on anything material. Dinner went quietly until one of my father's associates asked Gabriel about his work. "I manage at a small cafe downtown," he said simply. There was a brief silence, not mocking, but heavy. Someone murmured, "How humble," and Amelia, with that same silky tone, added, "So romantic, marrying for love. You don't see that much anymore." I saw my father's eyes watching me. He said nothing, but something in his expression told me this was more than dinner. It was a mirror, and he wanted to see what I'd do. That night, after everyone left, my father called me to his study. "Victoria," he said, "I've been patient, but I need to know something. Do you truly love Gabriel as you did before?" I hesitated. "Of course I do." He studied me carefully. "Then why do you let others decide what your love is worth?" I couldn't answer. My throat felt tight. He sighed and leaned back. "You were raised to know the price of things, not their value. That's my mistake, but it's not too late to learn." Those words haunted me because I didn't want to admit that I was starting to value appearances again, even over the heart that had never failed me. Weeks passed. Gabriel and I grew quieter around each other. He still looked at me with love, but I started avoiding his gaze. It reminded me of how undeserving I felt. Then one cold afternoon, everything began to shift. I came home to find my father's car parked outside our house, something that never happened unannounced. Inside, my father sat calmly with Gabriel, a cup of tea between them. They looked like two men having a business meeting, except this one was about hearts, not contracts. "Victoria," my father said, "Gabriel and I were discussing something important. I'd like your opinion." I sat down, nervous. He continued, "I've been thinking of promoting Gabriel to manage one of my logistics branches. It's a lot of responsibility, but I believe he's capable." I blinked, unsure what to say. It was unexpected, generous, yes, but strange. My father never gave positions easily. Gabriel looked surprised too. "Sir, that's too much trust. I don't have the experience for that." My father smiled. "Experience can be learned. Character cannot." I watched as they spoke to men I loved in very different ways, but all I could think was, what if he fails? What will people say? I didn't realize it then, but this was my father's quiet test. He wasn't testing Gabriel's skills. He was testing my heart. The following months were tough. Gabriel accepted the position with humility and threw himself into work. But success takes time, and whispers spread quickly. Some said my father was being charitable. Others claimed Gabriel only got the role because he married me, and slowly I started to believe them. I began comparing him again to the men I grew up around, the kind who drove expensive cars and wore confidence like perfume. Gabriel's world seemed smaller by comparison. When I finally voiced my frustration, it wasn't kind. "You're working so hard, Gabriel, but for what? You're still treated like an outsider." He looked hurt. "Is that what you think of me?" I didn't answer. He stood there, silent for a long time, then said quietly, "I thought love was about standing beside each other, not above." And then he walked out. That night I cried, not because of what he said, but because I knew he was right. And still, I couldn't say sorry. Pride has a cruel way of silencing love. In the days that followed, my father called me more, often asking simple questions. "How's Gabriel? Do you talk much these days? Do you still see the man you fell in love with, or just the world's reflection of him?" Each question pierced deeper. He never scolded me, never told me I was wrong. He just guided the silence until I heard my own heart again. But it was too late, because soon I would be the one to wound Gabriel more deeply than anyone else ever had. And that wound, born from pride, would become the turning point that changed everything. Winter came early that year, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there, like a quiet sorrow. The city looked beautiful from the outside, covered in white, but inside me, everything felt gray. Gabriel and I barely spoke anymore. He left early for work, came home late, and when he did, his smile seemed to carry exhaustion instead of peace. I tried to act as if everything was fine, posting perfect pictures, showing up to social events, pretending my world hadn't changed. But every time I returned home, that small house reminded me of how far I had drifted from my heart. One evening, I attended a charity gala, one of my father's. Though he wasn't there that night, I went alone. Gabriel had said softly that morning, "I'd rather not go. I'm not made for those places." I nodded and left without a word. At the gala, Amelia was there again, radiant, confident, wearing that smile that could slice glass. When she saw me, she hugged me too tightly, whispering, "You look tired, Victoria. Marriage doesn't suit you as much as money did." I forced a laugh, but the words stung more than I wanted to admit. As the evening went on, the whispers followed me. I heard them half sentences hidden behind champagne glasses. She could have had anyone. He's a nice man, but so plain. Even her father must regret it. I smiled through it all, but my hands trembled around the glass, and in that fragile moment, I made a mistake that would haunt me. Amelia leaned closer, her voice low and sharp. "You know, my company's looking for someone to manage partnerships. I could recommend you. You'd be back where you belong, without complications." Her eyes flicked toward the empty space where Gabriel should have been. She was offering me an escape, a life without judgment, without the ache of simplicity. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And silence, I learned, can sometimes sound like betrayal. When I got home that night, the house was dark. Gabriel sat in the living room, a half-finished cup of tea beside him. He didn't look angry, just tired. He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was worse than any argument. "Were you happy tonight?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard. "It was fine," he nodded slowly. "Did anyone ask about me?" The question felt heavier than it should have. "No," I whispered. He gave a small, sad smile. "They never do." Then, after a pause, "But I keep hoping that maybe one day you will." That broke something inside me. I wanted to say sorry, to tell him I still loved him, but pride held my tongue hostage. He stood up, went to the kitchen, and said quietly, "Your father called me today. That caught my attention, Dad. Why?" "He wants me to accompany him on a business trip to meet potential investors in one of his new companies." I blinked. "He invited you?" "Yes," Gabriel said, his voice even. He said, "It's time I see what responsibility really looks like." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or suspicious. My father didn't just invite anyone into his business circle. This was unusual. "Do you think he's testing you?" I asked, half joking. Gabriel looked at me with a faint smile. "Maybe he's testing both of us." They left for Vancouver the next morning. The house felt emptier than ever. Days passed with only brief phone calls. Gabriel sounded calm, almost too calm. When I asked how things were going, he just said, "Your father's teaching me more than I expected." Then, one afternoon, my father's assistant called. "Mr. Jackson wanted me to let you know he'll be hosting a private gathering next week. You should come, it'll be important." Her tone was strange, formal, almost secretive. When the day came, I drove to my father's mansion. The driveway glittered under the evening lights. Inside, everything looked familiar. The same marble floors, the same paintings, the same calm piano music in the background. But something felt different, heavier. Guests were gathered in the grand hall, investors, family, friends, and among them, Amelia, again, smiling as if she belonged everywhere. I noticed my father speaking quietly with Gabriel near the stairs. Gabriel looked different, composed, confident, dressed in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly, one I'd never seen before. When he turned and saw me, his expression was unreadable. Amelia, standing beside me, smirked. "Ah, the driver looks good tonight." I frowned. He's not. But before I could finish, my father's voice filled the room. "Thank you all for coming," he began. He stood tall, poised, his voice carrying the authority that could silence an entire hall. He spoke about legacy, trust, and integrity, words I'd heard him say 100 times before. But then his tone softened. "Tonight," he said, "I want to introduce someone important, someone who has reminded me that strength isn't measured by wealth, but by character." He paused. I felt my heart pound. This man has worked humbly beside me, not for money or name, but for something far greater, for love, for purpose, for truth. People murmured, curious. Then my father smiled faintly and turned to Gabriel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "meet my successor, the man I trust to continue my legacy. My son-in-law, Gabriel." The room went silent. Utter, breathless silence. I stared at him, at my father, at Gabriel, unable to move. Amelia's face turned pale, her lips parting in disbelief. "You're your driver?" she whispered. My father's eyes hardened slightly. "No," he said calmly. "My daughter's husband, and the man I chose to test not for his skills, but for his heart." Gasps echoed through the hall. Cameras clicked, glasses froze mid-air. Gabriel stood quietly beside my father, his expression calm, but his eyes deep with emotion, not triumph, not pride, just quiet pain, because he knew I had failed that test. After the announcement, I couldn't face anyone. I walked out into the cold night air, my heart pounding. The snow was falling again, slow and soft. I heard footsteps behind me. Victoria, Gabriel said quietly. I turned, tears already burning my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" He took a breath. "Because your father asked me not to. He wanted to see if you'd still stand beside me when the world stopped seeing value in me." I felt my knees weaken. "So, all this time," he nodded. "He gave me simple work on purpose. He wanted to see what mattered to us, love or pride." "And I failed," I whispered. Gabriel's eyes softened. "No, you stumbled. There's a difference." I covered my face, ashamed. "I let everyone make me doubt you." "Doubt us?" He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Victoria, I never wanted to prove anything. I just wanted you to remember who we were before the world told us what we should be." The tears finally fell. "I'm so sorry, Gabriel." He sighed, his breath visible in the cold. "I know you are, but sometimes love has to break before it learns what it's made of." From inside the house, I heard my father's voice faintly, still talking to guests, proud, composed. When I looked back at him through the window, I saw him watching us quietly, his expression unreadable. He had orchestrated this entire evening, not to humiliate me, but to wake me. Later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, my father called me into his study. He stood by the fireplace, the glow of the flames soft against his face. "Victoria," he said, "I didn't do this to punish you. I did it to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I whispered. "From becoming what this world tried to make you, someone who forgets what love is worth." I looked down, ashamed. "I failed you, Dad." He shook his head. "No, my dear. You failed yourself for a while, but you found your way back. Then, softer wealth is a wall. If you build it too high, love can't climb over." His words sank deep into me. That night, as Gabriel and I drove home, silence filled the car. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing, the kind of silence where forgiveness begins to grow. When we reached home, Gabriel turned to me and said quietly, "Next time someone calls me your driver, I'll take it as a compliment." I laughed through my tears. "Why?" He smiled. "Because driving you home, that's all I ever wanted." And for the first time in months, I reached for his hand, holding it tightly. The warmth between our fingers felt like the first sunrise after a long winter. The days that followed my father's revelation were quiet. Not empty quiet, but the kind that makes you listen to yourself. The house no longer echoed with Amelia's laughter or the shallow voices that used to fill it. Instead, there was just the soft sound of wind brushing against the tall windows, and the steady rhythm of Gabriel's footsteps as he moved through the hallways, calm. Collected, no longer shadowed by misunderstanding, I had seen many emotions in my life: pride, envy, admiration. But what I saw in Amelia's eyes that day was something different. It was shame. The kind of shame that forces you to face the truth you've avoided for years. And in that quiet shame, I found my own reflection. Because deep down, I had also been guilty of silence, of fear, of letting the world define who my husband should be. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found Gabriel sitting by the window in our room. The snow outside glowed under the moonlight, and his face looked peaceful. I stood behind him for a moment, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I had so many words inside me, all tangled together. Apologies, gratitude, love, regret. "Gabriel," I whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes soft. "Yes." "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "for not standing up that day, for letting her think you were someone else." He looked at me for a long moment, and then smiled, that same gentle, knowing smile that first caught my heart years ago. "You don't owe me an apology," he said. "People see what they're ready to see. Sometimes silence teaches more than defense ever could." I blinked back tears. He always had a way of turning pain into peace. "But it hurt," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Watching her? Watching them treat you like that?" He reached for my hand, his touch warm against my skin. "Victoria," he said softly, "you married me when everyone told you not to. You saw my heart before you saw anything else. One person's judgment can't change that." His words wrapped around me like a blanket. In that moment, I realized something profound. Gabriel didn't need to prove himself to anyone. He was already enough, always had been. The next morning, my father called me into his study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books, his favorite space, the one he used for thinking rather than talking. He was sitting by the fireplace, a cup of tea beside him. When I entered, he looked up, his eyes calm as ever. "Sit down, Victoria." I did. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the flames flicker before finally saying, "You know, love isn't really tested by what you gain. It's tested by what you're willing to lose." I stayed quiet, knowing his words always carried layers. He continued, "I wanted to see if the world around you would change you, or if you would change the world. I watched how you handled wealth, how you handled pride, and I watched Gabriel, how he never lost his dignity, even when others mistook it for weakness." My eyes grew wet. "You knew what Amelia would think." He nodded. "People like her are easy to predict, but I wanted you to see it for yourself. To learn the cost of silence and the strength of truth." I swallowed hard. "And what did you see, Father?" He smiled faintly. "I saw my daughter finally learn that humility is not poverty, and love, when it's real, doesn't need a title." His words settled in my heart like sunlight after rain. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. "Gabriel is not just my heir, Victoria. He's my hope that this family will never lose its soul. Money can be inherited, but wisdom and kindness must be earned." He placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant. The same ring my mother had worn. "Give this to him," my father said, not as a symbol of wealth, but of legacy. I took the ring carefully, tears slipping down my cheeks. He leaned back, smiling softly. "You chose well, my dear." That evening, I walked into the garden where Gabriel was standing. The world around us was quiet, snow falling lightly, the garden lights casting a soft golden glow. He looked at me curiously as I approached. "Your father spoke to me today," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Oh," he asked gently. "He told me something beautiful," I continued, holding out the box. When he opened it, his eyes widened slightly. "This was my mother's," I said. "He wanted you to have it, not because of who he is, but because of who you are." Gabriel's expression softened. "Victoria—" "I don't need, I know," I interrupted softly, smiling through tears. "That's exactly why you deserve it." He took my hand, slipping the ring onto my finger instead. "It belongs here," he whispered. "Right where it began, I laughed softly, tears glistening on my cheeks. "Always the gentleman." He smiled. "Always your driver, too." We both laughed, and somehow that laugh felt different. It wasn't hiding pain anymore. It was full of peace. Weeks passed. The world outside moved on, but something inside me had changed forever. I started noticing things I used to overlook. The way the morning light hit our kitchen window, the quiet joy in sharing coffee, the sound of Gabriel's laughter echoing through the hall. And sometimes, when guests came by, I watched them closely. Some still carried that subtle air of judgment, their eyes flicking to Gabriel as if trying to place him. But I no longer stayed silent.